Hey, as we get started tonight, I want to welcome everybody to the Biblical X-Files, where we attempt to connect myths, legends, and conspiracies to a biblical worldview and unpack those untold stories of the Bible. I want to thank all the viewers for your support. Please share with your friends, subscribe if you would, hit the like button. All those are little ways that you can help us with growing our podcast.
It's free, by the way. All that's free.
It's all free. And we want to thank you for the questions that you have submitted. Please go to jaiandI.com, submit some questions. We need a few more, and then we're going to dedicate an entire episode to just question and answers. But when you send your questions in, just give us your first name, the city and state that you're in. That might help us on kind of identifying so you know it's your question. All right, man. So last week we discussed the following. Let's give a recap because we're going to do something different this evening. The biblical version of Nephilim and how human hybrids arrived here on earth. We talked about that last week. We looked at the book of Enoch, that apocryphal book, that we looked at it not as inspired scripture. We looked at it as an historical account to verify what we think and believe happened in Genesis chapter 6 and after. We briefly looked at how Nephilim and human hybrids lured people in with technology, how they used those schemes to draw them in and then turn on them. And we're going to look at how that's going to happen in the days of Noah as we approach what we're probably in right now as we approach the rapture. We looked at how they contaminated the genome. Everything that God created, they tried to counterfeit and contaminate. And we briefly discussed how giants, those hybrids, can be found almost in every culture all around the world, and that we find that very interesting, and we're going to look at subject matter on that later on. So tonight, I think this episode, we're going to call it a what-if episode. What if this happens? What if that happens? We're going to take the biblical narrative, and we're just going to ask some questions. Could it be? Could it be like this? We're going to talk about possible scenarios of how those human hybrids are going to return. We're going to talk about how we are being conditioned as we speak for the arrival of those last day human hybrids. We're going to talk about how those human hybrids are maybe already infiltrating and how they will infiltrate all areas of society, how they're going to be accepted, and how they will deceive. Their main objective is deception. We're going to look at I guess you could say this might be the last night we're going to look at the days of Noah. Not entirely. We're just going to put that file to the side because I think as we're talking about human hybrids and giants, I would like in our next episode to open up a file called Proof of Giants, Proof of Nephilim, and their handiwork that's all around us. Start unpacking that. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think it deserves its own X-File.
All right, cool. So our core verse for tonight, found in Matthew chapter 24, verse 37, and we're going to look at a few other verses from this chapter, but Jesus said it will be like the days of Noah. What does that mean? I mean, we've said that how many times? If I had $1 for every time, it'd be pretty good. In context, for those who are like really up on their theology, the context of it will be like the days of Noah, Jesus is using an analogy of everybody's going to be working, living life, doing their thing just like they were in the days of Noah. And then God put all the animals on the ark, and then he told Noah and his family, get on the ark, and he shut the door, saving them from the impending judgment. And that is really allegory for the rapture. Before the tribulation takes place, that 7-year tribulation, there will be what's called a snatching away of the church. And this right here with Noah going into the ark is symbolism for that they were spared the judgment, and we as believers in Christ will be spared the judgment to come.
So a literal event, a historical event, that's also a foreshadowing is what you're saying.
This is definitely, the Noah account is definitely a foreshadowing. That's a good way of putting it. And so Jesus is referencing that imagery, but it doesn't stop there. If that's all he wanted to stress with what the days, what it's going to look like as we move down that prophetic timeline, he could have chose other wording, but he chose it will be like the days of Noah because there's wordplay there. It's going to be like the days of Noah. That 8-word statement, it will be like the days of Noah, contains a ton of information when you're looking at it through the correct prism. And that's what we have tried to unpack over the last couple episodes, looking at this phrase through the right lens. And tonight we're going to look at some scenarios that may play out as our world moves at a frantic pace down this prophetic timeline to usher in the rapture of the church. I've been asked this question: why do we devote this much time to this subject? Isn't there better things to talk about? I wouldn't say there's better things to talk about, but I will say this. This is the number one reason why we're doing this. As a last day pastor, I need to inform the people what the last days are going to look like. And this whole chapter of verse 24, it starts out with his disciples, Jesus' disciples, saying, hey, what's it going to look like right before you come back? Give us a Simeon. Give us a sign. Not just a sign. Give us a big sign so we'll know. And if Jesus is going to take the time to give them not just one Simeon, he gives them a list. He gives them detailed information. He even tells them to go study a parable. Then I think it's good enough for ask the same question, what it's going to look like, and to teach about it. If Jesus taught on it, I believe we all, as last day pastors especially, should be teaching on that. So what's it going to be like as we move into this, what we call the days of Noah? I think we're already in the days of Noah. But you know, there were a lot of years, what was over 1,000 of the days of Noah? And then there's a couple hundred years after the flood that are called the days of Noah. So just because I say we're in the days of Noah doesn't mean I believe Jesus is coming back tonight. He could come back tonight. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we're really, really close. So I think it'd be good for us to look at some of the signs of Simeons that Jesus gives before he says it will be like the days of Noah, to put it into perspective so you can see that we are in the days of Noah. So let me tell you. Verse 4 says, Jesus answered them after they asked that question. And let me say it this way. They're leaving the temple when they ask this question. And first thing Jesus says, he points to the temple and says, don't even think about me coming back until this is destroyed. So the clock didn't start ticking to 70 AD when Titus came in and destroyed the temple. So they knew that as long as the temple's there, we're good to go. Then they go up on the mountain, the Mount of Olives, and this is where this conversation is taking place. But on the way out of town, I truly believe this. Jesus was big on, with his disciples, like really showing them. Like, remember the story when they're leaving the upper room and they're going out to the Garden of Gethsemane, and he stops at that vineyard and says, I am the vine, you're the branch. And he's like holding a vine and a branch in his hand. And Jesus would point the wheat. When he had his disciples with them, he like really used object lessons right there just for them to see. And Flavius Josephus tells us that there was a display of Nephilim bones in Jerusalem at the time of Christ near the temple. And I believe when Jesus is talking to them, he points over and says to those bones, it will be like the days of Noah. Because that goes in line with the way he teaches. And those bones were there. It's not a coincidence. And I think he was referencing those bones. But let's go ahead and read. Jesus answered them and said, take heed that no man deceives you. The very first thing he starts off with is deception. There is coming a great deception, and it will increase with intensity as we move down the prophetic timeline. And you will see it all around you right now, deception everywhere. And we need to dedicate an entire episode to what Paul teaches young Timothy about the deception, because when you look at that Greek wording from the first century, you're going to go, holy moly, that's happening right now. It's crazy. So human hybrids are going to play a critical role in the great deception. Just know that. Number 2, the second sign he gives is in verse 6. You will hear, I know you've heard this verse, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. You've had to have heard that. Mm-hmm. All right. And then it says, don't be alarmed. This must take place. That wars and rumors of war comes from the Greek word polymos, which means a war like a kinetic fighting, like you see going on in Europe right now with Russia and Ukraine, yeah. And then the Hamas and Hezbollah and Israel. It means a war. It means a fight. It means a battle. But it also means great disputes, strife, and hate-filled arguments. Back in the day, you could have an argument, walk away, and be friends. Now you have an argument, you hate each other. Every one of these bullets for that Greek definition you see happening right now, that's part of the last days. And we're going to see it intensify with greater intensity as we move down this prophetic timetable. Verse 7, for nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. You've heard that, right? Mm-hmm. And then when you just think about it, you know, if we're looking at it from the English definition, we think it's like more countries fighting each other, right? That has nothing to do with that in the Greek. This comes from the Greek word ethnos. Jesus is saying ethnic group and ethnic group are going to be fighting against each other. Little regions and little regions are going to be fighting against each other. Yeah, it could mean kingdoms and all that, but the Greek word ethnos has a totally different meaning. I think we see racial division increasing every day. They're chanting from the mountains to the sea. That's saying, hey, let's destroy an ethnic group called the Jews. So we see this coming with greater intensity. Kingdom comes from the word Bahalasia in the Greek, and it means political group. It's not. It's just kingdom and nation. That's ethnic. The kingdom here and all that's coming from Bahalasia, which means political groups. Have you seen how political groups can't come to ground? There's no more common ground anymore between any political group. It's we got to hate each other, we got to own each other, we got to troll each other, all that kind of stuff. That's last of the last day stuff. Politicians will not get along anymore. Ideologies will fight against and war against each other. Religious groups will war against each other. Again, geographical regions will war against each other. Do you think you see that happening now?
No.
Okay.
Not at all. What are you talking about?
See, so we see it happening with greater intensity, and it's going to get worse. And then verse 10 talks about wholesale betrayal. You can't trust anybody. Contracts and all that kind of stuff are just going to be useless. And it says lawlessness will increase. I don't see it.
Yeah, literally clueless.
Yeah, I don't see it.
Nothing.
And then anger is going to replace love. I don't see angry people. I live in a bubble. I'm just kidding. So we see that it's happening. And he's saying that all this is going to take place. And when you see all this taking place with greater intensity, start looking for Nephilim. Start looking for the days of Noah to intensify. Start looking for re-entry into society, those human hybrids that ruled today pre-flood. That's what he's saying. I want to start with a quote from President Ronald Reagan, 2 of them, as we get into our what-ifs tonight. I want to say a few more things, and we're just going to bounce some what-ifs. Ronald Reagan said this in 1987 as he's addressing the United Nations in a speech. He says, perhaps we need someone from outside our universe, an outside threat, to make us recognize our common bond. And he's talking to all the nations that are represented within the United Nations saying, hey, dude, we need an alien to come down, so we'll start working together. Now, later on, after he left the office, he was being interviewed, and he said this. He goes a little bit deeper with this thought. He says, I occasionally think how quickly our differences in this world would vanish if we're facing an alien threat from an outside world. Use the word alien. So, was he kind of foreshadowing what's to come? Would he think about what he's saying? What's going to unite the world?
Well, I think whether he was actually foreshadowing, intentionally or not, I think what he's saying is true.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, a common enemy is the most classic way to unite anybody.
And if it's coming from, we don't believe it's aliens, we believe it's Nephilim. But if they're pretending to be aliens, that's going to unite the world. Now, we mentioned this briefly last week, but I didn't really get into it, and I need to. How many countries do you think have a space force? And when I say a dedicated military arm that's designed to fight and protect, well, first to protect assets in outer space and to wage war in outer space, how many countries do you think?
I mean, I would think maybe like 4 or 5 at the most. Like, I couldn't think of much more than that.
Let me tell you, 12.
Holy cow.
The United States started one in 1982, but it really got its claim in 2019 when it was called Space Force. Totally different than NASA. NASA does exploration. This is the fight.
So there's like science-based stuff like NASA, and then there's military warfare. Is that what you're?
Yeah, pretty much.
About?
So when I read these off, don't think space exploration. Think space war. South Korea did it in 1970. Canada did it in 1983. Russia did it in 1992. China in 2015. India in 2018. France in 2019. NATO and Italy installed one. That's the EU. That's all those countries over there have a space force that they give money to and send men to learn to fight fly the new craft. But Italy in the same year started their own separate one. Then Iran, which is a great place, 2020 did the same thing. Australia last year, and Colombia in South America this year. 8 of the 8 countries since 2015 have decided that they're going to put national treasure and resources to defend outer space or to do something in outer space. That's not a coincidence with all these alien and UP sightings that are being talked about. In fact, we have a video. Let's show the video from the congressional hearing when a congressman from South Carolina asked the officer in the Air Force specific questions.
Okay. You've stated that the government is in possession of potentially non-human spacecraft. Based on your experience and extensive conversations with experts, do you believe our government has made contact with intelligent extraterrestrials?
Something I can't discuss in public setting.
Okay, I can't ask when you think this occurred. If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries, yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
All right. The video said biologics. He didn't. He said he used the word craft of some type. Didn't get into details because he couldn't. And he said biologics out there for the whole world to hear. Now, why are all the governments around the world developing a defense system against these crafts with biologics? And why does our government have 2 websites? Let me give you what they are. The government is bringing what they're calling now UAPs into the mainstream. Let me say it verbatim so people can Google it and look at it because there's some really cool stuff on this. I would suggest go to the National Archive News and go down to the very bottom and start looking at those old black and white videos, because a lot of that comes from Operation Blue Book, which has now we've now realized and have been told that the government set up a specific misinformation organization from the Pentagon to discredit and make everybody that talked about UFOs back then crazy, conspiracy, tin hat wearing weirdos from the 1940s, from Roswell all the way up until just a year ago. You know, now they're coming clean with all the whistleblowers that are talking. You can also go to what's called AARO. That is a website, and it's called All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. They make it like that so nobody's going to, how can you Google that? Just type in AARO and you'll find it. And that's the newest website that details, gives you redacted. Certain stuff's redacted, but they're really open. You can see the Tic Tac video there. You can see a lot of things, and it's just out in the open now. And they just had a congressional hearing as we speak today. Earlier today, they were talking about these UAPs. Now, before we move on, I want to say this. We were always grew up UFOs, right? Woo! They changed the name. UFO, they're calling them UAPs now because they want to change the lexicon on us. Because if you think UFO, you think crazy. But if you think UAP, you're not crazy. But they're the same thing. Unidentified flying object, a UAP, what's the difference? There is no difference. It's just articulation. They're trying to get one that signifies conspiracy crazy out of the lexicon and reintroduce to the world a new word within the lexicon that you're not crazy if you talk about it. I like UFO because that's what I grew up with, so I probably won't call them UAPs. I'll call them UFOs. I don't care. So the government is coming clean with what they have. Now, it's going to take them a while. Some more people are going to have to blow a whistle, but I believe there's more information coming. Now, these biologics that they have, we've already dedicated an episode to DNA, holy and unholy. This must be Nephilim DNA biologics that they have. I think that they're going to play, these Nephilim are going to play a huge role, as we already established, in the last of the last days. But how we were talking about all these giants? And I got these books here that talk about giants and evidence of giants. So they're great resources. And I said that I don't believe that they're going to come back as giants because I said if they come down Main Street, they're going to get shot. I really gave that a lot of thought after our last episode. Really thought about it. I've even prayed about it because I want to make sure what I say, is not going to come to bite me at the Bema seat, when I stand before God. But I believe that there's probably more types of Nephilim that are on their way. But I can think of two right now that I can trace the scripture, and probably other types that are going to show up. But I believe the Nephilim that we're going to see unveiled probably within my lifetime, definitely within yours, I'm calling him a little benevolent helper. He's just a little unassuming, benevolent helper, and he's going to make Ronald Reagan's dream come true. He's going to, this is not just going to be one show up. They're going to be one to show up, then there'll be many. And then they're going to make Ronald Reagan's dream come true because the world's going to rally around this. Because these guys are going to come with a lot of answers. Think back to the book of Enoch when we were talking about. I think that these little new benevolent helpers that are on their way, if they're not already here, Dr. Jacob's books that's on your shelf right there talks about they're here. He's adamant that they're here. I haven't seen one, so I can't say that. He says he's witnessed them, so I don't know. But I believe that this little benevolent helper who's going to be Nephilim, even though he's small, don't think that because they may come down average size that they don't have superhuman strength and superhuman intellect. There's still strength of a giant, the mental acumen of those old giants of old. They're just going to present themselves differently because Satan has to always change. And we'll get into why he does that in just a second. But I think they're going to come with energy first. And they're going to show us, remember I told you about how they harnessed energy before the flood? I think that they're going to come with the energy answer first to get all the global warming people to stop freaking out.
Yeah, that's a religion in and of itself.
It is a religion.
That's a religious answer. That's like an answer to a religious prayer.
This guy be their prophet then.
Yeah,
okay, so he'll be their prophet.
Yeah.
And then one of the things that's becoming scarce around the world that you must have to live is water. And I believe that since they're not as big in stature, they don't have to eat people these days to stay alive. I believe that they're going to have an answer for water and food shortages. That will not happen when they're here pre-rapture and probably halfway through.
So you're saying there will be a lot of genuinely positive things for us to notice once they get here, and they will solve problems.
They'll be called an alien, so whatever they're propagating, whatever they're selling, don't buy.
Right.
Because it might look really good on the outside, but it's rotten to the core on the inside.
Sure.
It's all a facade. They are going to make things easier. They're going to have a lot of answers, but remember, they turn on you real quick. Yep. And we don't need to be duped by them. We need to steer clear of them as a believer in Christ, because Christ is my answer. always will be and always going to be until he brings me home, not this benevolent being from some other planet that they're going to pray them out and call them. You better know they're Nephilim. They're going to have new propulsion systems. The reason why I say that is these Tic Tacs that you see flying around defy the laws of gravity as we know them. So whatever mechanical design that these crafts possess, they're going to bring them down and sell them and show them in wide scale. So air travel, everything is going to change overnight. We're going to go into a new technology renaissance overnight as soon as they get here. I mean, it's just going to be bam. Just like Daniel said, right before Christ comes back, there's going to be advancements. You can travel anywhere just kind of overnight. He kind of prophesying this advancement that's happening, that's going to happen as soon as they show up. They're going to show up with dimensional portals, showing you they can put away all the other science stuff that's working on portals, and they're going to say, hey, we'll show you how to open a portal. Whoop, there it is. I don't know how it want to work, but they're going to open portals. They're going to have medical breakthroughs. This is the one that hits home with me, because I'm going to be hard pressed if it's something that they show up soon, not to follow their answer, but that is something that we have to stand firm on. Know the difference between science and the voodoo. I guess I don't know. This is where we're going to have to start really praying and seeking discernment on what to use and what not to. And that's something down the road we'll talk about.
We already have to do that now without Nephilim, and it's especially going to be true once they're in the picture.
But I just told you a little list, man. Think that they're going to produce things that we can't think about because we don't have the same mind as they do. They're way advanced, so no telling what they're going to bring to the table to show that they're benevolent, show that they're aliens that come in peace, and that they have all the answers. We got you covered. Stuff like that. I believe Satan is developing a hybrid army. That's the second kind of Nephilim that probably won't. I don't think that they'll be seen in the last of the last days. Maybe a glimpse right before the rapture. Maybe that could be a cluing in that the rapture is imminent. Because I believe that these are more for the tribulation. That's after the church is gone. And I believe that these hybrids to come will be much stronger and taller and more menacing in their appearance. I believe that I got some verses for them. Let me see where they are. The verses here. It's Revelation. I thought I put them in here. I guess it didn't. It's Revelation 9. Talks about these military, Satan's army. That is, the whole chapter is really wild when you read what God's letting out of Satan's over his dominion that's going to come out and wreak havoc on the earth. But in Revelation 9, he talks about this mounted horsemen, this mounted army, and he gives a description of what they look like. And if you really look at the imagery there, you know that that's Nephilim. And then over in Revelation chapter 19, it talks about the armies of the king's armies, and Satan's armies come to go against God and go against Jesus as we get ready to come back. And that word armies, when you look at it in the Greek, it's the kings, his regional leaders had their own armies, and Satan had an army. And Satan's army, his hybrid army, is kind of like the stronger one, and the other armies conform to what the big guys want to do, because they're coming in with superhuman strength, superhuman weapons. So all the weapons that we have now pale in comparison to what these guys are going to bring out. So that's the second type of Nephilim that's to come, probably not in our lifetime, but they will be here. They're the big army. And then there's probably something in between that I'm missing when I'm looking, but that might show up. So we know that they're descending back to earth. We know that they're coming. They're going to descend back to earth like the Greek mythology, the Greek gods of old, and then they're going to want to fill up a pantheon, so to speak. And what these Nephilim are going to offer you is live forever, be your own little God. There's nothing out of your reach. That's the return of Nephilim. Now, I believe that, what we call that, re-education. you hear this word re-education from certain political leaders talking about certain political groups, which plays back to what Jesus said. The political groups are going to fight against political groups, the kingdoms against kingdoms, right? So they talk about certain political groups, if you believe a certain way or vote a certain way, need to be re-educated. They said it out loud, need to be re-educated. So I believe that when the rapture takes place, I think that re-education word is starting to get into our lexicon. We're starting to hear it more and more because it's warming us up to people who are going to be re-educated. So when the rapture takes place, you have over 1 billion people leave the earth. The Nephilim that are here are going to say, hey, wait a minute. Our military had to come and take them away to be re-educated because they were stopping the progress. They were stopping everything that we were trying to do good for you guys. These Christian wackos, we had to go re-educate them. They're not going to say they got raptured away and God wins and his truth is prevailing. They're going to come up with a lie. And I think that now, is that the lie that they're going to use? I don't know, but I think that that's very logical. It could be. So, I mean, we're just talking about what ifs tonight, right?
Well, we're definitely the ones that need to be re-educated. That's for sure.
Yeah. So I think I think as the what if goes, I think it's very plausible to think that we, as a nation, will one day see what's called an alien that we know as Nephilim brought out at the White House, signing a peace treaty with America, signing a peace treaty with the world to bring all the help that we need, to stop all the chaos, and to make life better for everyone. We know it's a Nephilim being. Other people are going to call it an alien and think it's their Messiah, think that that's what's come to help them. They're going to intermingle. How that's going to look, I have no idea. I don't really know, but they're going to intermingle and live among us. They did before the flood, so that means they have to now. I don't know how that looks. I think it's going to be rather, I wouldn't say intimidating. It's going to be weird.
Well, I think it's going to start in a digital software space first.
Good.
Because I think there's already a lot of progress in virtual reality, augmented reality, different versions of essentially gaming and also media consumption. There's so much technology that's being evolved right now to create a new level of immersion. So you're literally putting goggles on and you've got certain remote controllers, and it's a truly first-person visual experience to see these characters in these games, in these environments that are just completely made up, but they're three-dimensional. To me, that feels like the perfect starting point to introduce people slowly to the idea of not believing what you see and replacing what you see with something completely completely absurd. I mean, obviously it takes its form in an entertaining way right now, but I think that is a very good place to start kind of conditioning us to kind of get comfortable with seeing things we're not used to seeing.
I think that is a way of conditioning. I think, as I said last week, that we are being conditioned with superheroes forever. I grew up with superheroes, Superman movies, the originals and the Batmans and all that. And you see all these children running around with their little Halloween costumes on. We're conditioned to like hybrids. That's a human hybrid. That's just in our DNA. There's hundreds of movies about UFOs. I mean, it's hard to Google them, because there's so many of them. But the thing that I find interesting about the alien genre, so to speak, even all the way back to Orson Welles, they're these menacing, scary, they're coming in with these big ominous ships and they're shooting lasers and they're blowing stuff up and they're just going to wipe out mankind. And then they started changing them around the 80s with this little E.T. that eats like Reese Pieces and I want to go home, that kind of guy, and you kind of like him, and he's a little guy, he rides around in a basket and he's weird looking, but you like him, So they changed them. And even with E.T., you still had around there, you had these UFO movies where the UFOs were just, the aliens and UFOs are just blowing everything up and causing havoc. And then you start to see, as we get up into the 2020s and up until 2023, the new alien movies are making them more benevolent. I would encourage everyone to go Google and look at the trailer for the movie Jewel about a extraterrestrial that crashes in some unassuming man's backyard. He's kind of like a cranky curmudgeon, and he gets this little benevolent jewel, and he feeds it apples, and he loves it, and it's just really nice. And then it has to go home, and he's like bowing down to it as it's leaving. It's weird. I think that they're conditioning us that, hey, these guys aren't such a bad thing. It's coming in, it's getting into our hard drive, which is our brain, and so it triggers that. I think these are things that Hollywood is purposely doing to condition us to it. The government is conditioning us to tell us an alien's coming. I mean, why else would they say? Why would they let a guy get on and talk to Congress and have it piped off of news all around the world and say craft and biologics? So that right there is just confirming there's aliens without him violating the top secret clearance that he has. There's a craft and there's biologics. Well, what kind of craft and what kind of biologics? He didn't say, but I would assume, based on what I believe on Scripture, it is Nephilim biologics and a Nephilim craft. So do you have any questions on what you know about maybe a what if, a what if this could, I mean, because we're just really speculating, but we're trying to keep it within a scope of what we can go with Scripture. We're not just like going way out on a limb. I'm trying to keep it, boxed in. I could really take you crazy places, but I don't want to.
Yeah. And I think some more of the crazy places we'll do on our website down the road. And I think right now, I think the thing that I'm excited most about is hearing the questions from the viewers.
I am too.
And so, I mean, I have my own questions, of course, but I would like to kind of stack those up against what we see in the submissions on our website. You can, of course, comment on YouTube as well, but it's more direct, and to me, it's a lot easier for us to curate those if it's directly through our website. So
I'm confident that there's people listening that have a ton of questions based on what we talked about with our what ifs. Really, you need to submit them so we can answer them, because that's the only way you'll get those questions answered. And don't be fearful. If you are a believer in Christ, anything that we're saying should not cause you panic or fear. Think of it this way. God has chosen you, me, the church, for a time like this, because he knows we have what it takes to carry the mantle to the very end. And you were a runner. Now, they have these little things at track meets called relay races. Okay? And then what do they pass each time?
Baton.
If I'm right, we're the anchor on the baton carrying it to the finish line. That should be impressive. Know that God has chosen us to carry the baton to the finish line. Find encouragement with that. It means you have what it takes. Don't buy into Satan's lies that you can't make it, or be fearful, and don't buy into the deception. Carry the baton to the end. That will be amazing.